Let me first welcome Tripp Shriner and welcome all of you to the Weekend Wisdom series here. This is a fantastic Memorial Day weekend here in the US. So Tripp, thank you for doing this on a Saturday. We appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I'm going to jump right in. This is something that you've all chosen to do, to take some time out. On Saturday, we are also live casting this on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Twitter, and it is being recorded that you can also enjoy later on MEDICI Studio. So the goal here is to really ask a few easy questions of our VC friends in the industry and learn something from them and become a little wiser on the weekend. So let me start with this, Tripp. You're probably used to being pitched by founders and startups all the time, right? Give me your pitch. Give me your pitch. Tell me in a few minutes. Tell me about yourself. Have you been asked to pitch your fund? Have you, have you practiced your own pitch to the other side? If I ask you to pitch Point72 Ventures,
yeah, I mean, the short answer is I do it all the time. I don't know if you've noticed, but there's a lot of venture capital money out there. So we're now increasingly in the business of selling our money to entrepreneurs we want to work with. As far as the pitch goes, Point72 Asset Management is a global asset management firm. It's been around for a number of decades. Historically, the focus has been on a variety of hedge fund strategies, but about 4.5 years ago, senior management decided that they would leverage the expertise and platform that they have to go formally into the venture capital business. Given that they're an asset management firm, financial services was a logical place to start. And so I was lucky enough to come over with my partner, Pete, to help start up the business. Pete and I had worked together at JP Morgan as part of their strategic investments group. Over the past 4 years, we've built up a globally focused early stage fintech fund. The firm has launched a number of other areas of interest, including AI, machine learning, and enterprise. But as far as our group goes, we are early stage focused. For most people, that means sort of seed to Series B. As I mentioned earlier, globally focused within the US and Europe, which is where the predominance of our activity is. We're really fundamentally focused on financial technology. What I mean by that, as opposed to just fintech, is the underlying infrastructure enabling technologies that are selling into financial services participants to help them manufacture their products better, service their customers better, or improve their operations. As we've built up the business, with that focus in mind, we've tried to develop a model that's very customer-centric. And what I mean by that is we spend a disproportionate amount of our time not necessarily talking to startups, but rather talking to prospective buyers within the financial services industry, banks, asset managers, large fintechs, technology companies, to really understand what's on their minds, what trends they're seeing, what their pain points are, what type of technology and innovation that they want to be seeing. For us, that helps us on a number of different fronts. It helps us really understand what trends are driving the industry and what types of themes may be interesting from an investable standpoint. It helps us certainly on due diligence, the ability to call prospective customers and understand their appetite for a given technology. And I think most importantly, it also helps us as we support our portfolio companies. If we have a good sense of who cares about what or what pain points need to be addressed, it really helps us get our portfolio companies in the right doors, in the right places, given that customer focus. So that's been something that we've built out over the past couple of years. Happy to go into more detail, but why don't I leave it there, given the time we have.
Well, I must say that was way too long. I mean, if I were an investor and if you were to pitch yourself to me, I'm like, come on, man, tell me a story faster than that. That took too long, sorry. But in all seriousness, I think it is important for both investors and the founders to be able to, stand out, right? We heard from Matt Harris last week, and it is truly about a meeting of the minds between the investor and the founder. As you look at your specialty here at Point72 Ventures, right? Obviously, you come with your experience doing something similar, but in a different context, right? At JP Morgan. And we wanted to go a little bit deeper on that in terms of, is there really a big difference between corporate VC and the VC that you practice today? Or how would you kind of characterize the differences and similarities in your previous life and your current life?
Yeah, maybe if I were to just generalize that to the overall funding ecosystem for fintech entrepreneurs, we've always thought of it as sort of two ends. On the one hand, you have strategics or corporate venture groups, and they bring a lot of pros and a lot of cons. As far as the pros go, you're sitting down with a corporate group or a strategic investment group. More often than not, they are domain experts. There's less in the way of education, and you're pretty quickly able to get to a conversation that leans more toward strategy and a thoughtful discussion as opposed to simply education. And obviously with a lot of the corporate venture arms, depending upon their model, with an investment comes some sort of strategic relationship. And for an early stage company, that offers a variety of benefits. It could be distribution, it could be a customer, it could be brand and referenceability. Those are all great things that we saw during our time in the corporate venture part of the market. But there are cons, probably unsurprisingly, with a lot of financial services institutions that are moving into this space or have been in the space. They are subject to things that have historically plagued financial institutions. A lot of decision-making, longer processes, things like that. And that can be a challenge when you're an early stage company, and both speed and time are of the essence. On the other end of the spectrum, we saw a lot of more traditional generalists, venture capitalists who are also participating in this market. And I would almost sort of flip the pros and cons relative to the strategics. They can move quickly. They can provide neutral strategic guidance. They are good at being venture capitalists and board members, but more often than not, they're not domain experts. And so whether it's pre-investment or post-investment, I think founders have to spend a lot of time educating those types of groups. As we thought about our model, it was always with the mind that we would sit in the middle. We would take pieces of what was good about the strategic side of things, domain expertise, the ability to add strategic value, but try to look and feel like a venture capital fund, be able to move quickly and have a sort of financial orientation to our participation with any given company.
Is there like a clear guidance here for founders raising money that, don't spend your time with this type of investor at this stage in your fundraising? Is there like a clear set of guidelines that, as an example, right, if you're very early stage, don't spend your time with strategics because that's when you need someone like a Point72 more. When you are in your A, B, C, then think about strategic because then they'll help you better. Is that a general rule you would say, or how do you characterize that?
I would say there are certainly, there's a list of questions to ask as opposed to strict guidelines. I mean, as I look across the portfolio companies that I'm active with, a vast majority of them, even those at the early stage, do have some sort of strategic investor, whether it be customers or potential partners or other. But I think if I were to just point to one key question to ask, it's, what's your understanding of the nature of the relationship? And what I mean by that is, what is that strategic capital going to unlock? Does it accelerate a commercial relationship? And if so, who are the sponsors involved in that? What are the intentions on the investment side of the house from that strategic? Do they view this as something that is more passive where they want to be helpful? Do they want to be more active on the board? I think there are certainly, to your point, a number of considerations depending upon the stage, but certainly for those at the earlier stage, I think the thing you want to be certain of is exactly what you're getting into as it relates to the relationship both with the commercial and investing sides of those organizations.
Is there an example of all the investments that you've made, both in your corporate VC role and your current role now, where you feel like this is a decision that I'm making purely based on my gut, right? I'm not applying, or I'm taking a big risk in my decision here of making the investment. I know that something doesn't smell right. Something is not adding up in the Excel sheet, but I know this is the right thing to do. Have you done that ever?
So as an organization that prides itself on fundamentally rigorous work around investing, we don't do a lot in the way of gut feel investing, but what we do is have a very clear sense going into investment of what the risks are, what the unknowns are, and where we think, to sort of borrow where you were headed there, what the hair is around a given investment. In some instances, that could be improvements that need to be made in the product. In some instances, that could be additions that need to be made in the team. That's something that we try to be very transparent with portfolio companies about immediately at the point of investment. If anything, to create alignment, they know how we're feeling about their company. And I think as importantly, to then get aligned on how we're going to be helping them. So with any early stage business, there are a lot of unknowns and a lot of gaps. I think you just need to be aware of what those are, and you need to be communicative with a founding team about what you believe them to be.
And I think that last thing is definitely important, right? That transparency from both sides, I feel probably goes a long way, right? Just as you're expecting the founder to share with you how they look at the business, their growth KPIs, their projections, their markets, so on and so forth. Probably, you sharing with them what you consider, right, the metrics for success for an investment, that probably helps both parties understand, right? I mean, is that two-way transparency something that you believe in? I mean, is that important, or am I just making this up?
That is a central tenet of what we do as investors, and it's something that we've focused on because of the issues that we've seen it create when that transparency and that communication and that alignment aren't there. Practically, we sit down with portfolio companies, review effectively our investment memo with them to say, this is our view on your business. What do you agree with? What do you disagree with? Let's agree that there's alignment. I've been struck, I think, over time to see a number of businesses where either A, the founder doesn't have a good sense of what his or her investors think about the business, and B, there hasn't been a real discussion between founder and investor around what the founder's expectations are for those investors. There's kind of the classic derogatory, how can we be helpful thing. And I think part of the challenge with that is that conversation often doesn't go beyond how can we be helpful. I think it's important to create alignment upfront about, from a founder's perspective, what you want that portfolio company to be doing with you. And we go so far as to create discrete projects around those types of things, KPIs associated with them, and reporting back to the founders on how we're actually doing with them.
Let us hone in a little bit on the stage of investing that you focus on, which is the early stage. Isn't that the hardest stage to invest in? I mean, because you don't have as many metrics or numbers about the business to really go by. Is that the hardest? I mean, have you chosen like the hardest part of the VC cycle here?
We probably have, but the approach that we take is, I guess, twofold. From a top-down perspective, really understanding, is this company solving a pain point that we are seeing in the market? Are we hearing from customers that this is something that there is demand for out there? And I think that gives us comfort around going in at an earlier stage where you don't have those proof points. From a bottoms-up perspective, we typically try to see two key things from a business perspective. I think the first one is some sense of referenceability. Have we seen an instance where they are with a customer and they've evidenced their ROI to that customer? And I think secondarily, is there some degree of repeatability? Not necessarily do they have a sales machine in place and are we going to be able to see a flywheel start to unfold, but more, do we believe that first thing that they did with that first customer is something they will be doing with other customers? Now, if you kind of step back, that's a relatively scant number of proof points, but I think it gets us comfortable as we then work with a portfolio company to be able to accelerate some of those things.
Right. I want to add one more dimension to that. A lot of our audience is in emerging markets, and it's a pretty broad term, obviously. But if you were to, because you said that you are a global firm. I mean, you invest globally.
That's
Are
right.
you seeing less or more opportunity for you in emerging markets versus the US and Western Europe? You know, any particular thoughts on Africa, where we believe it is still fairly greenfield, but any thoughts on emerging markets as it relates to your early stage investment focus?
Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, in the US and Europe, we tend to focus on the financial technology side of things. And our sort of overarching belief there is people are generally well served or well served enough from incumbent financial services providers, where we tend not to invest in new types of financial service providers, rather technology providers that can help incumbents improve. As we go to those other markets, that's not necessarily the case. We see very large populations of underserved customers, whether they be consumers or small businesses. And so in those markets, I think there's a tremendous opportunity, both as it relates to a new generation of digital financial services providers, as well as new financial technology providers who are helping to develop new infrastructure and new technologies to power that ecosystem. Over the past several years, we've made a number of investments in Latin America. That's an area where we found opportunity both on the financial technology and financial services side. More recently, I've made a few investments in Asia and believe there's a lot of opportunity there. I actually, I started my investing career focused on a number of developing markets, but among them Africa. And so that's a bit near and dear to my heart as far as the opportunity goes. I think with the infrastructure that you have in place, largely driven by mobile penetration, there's an ability, and I think you've seen this in a lot of instances, to leapfrog what you're seeing in developing markets as far as the consumption of financial services goes.
Have you gotten tired of the M-Pesa case study yet after so many years?
I think I got tired of it about 5 years ago. I don't know where I am with it now.
Yeah. I think that was obviously ahead of its time, but it's amazing how it still comes up after so many years. And I think the challenge has been that there is no such thing as Africa, right? What worked in Kenya doesn't mean it's going to work in Tanzania, right?
That's right.
And I think that is true of pretty much any continent except for North America, right? Mm-hmm. Where you can't just say that it's going to work in Latin America, but there's no such thing.
Yes.
Let me shift here, right, just a little bit to talk about your parent, or I should say, the Point72 family as a whole, right? And you alluded to that as being, as having that data-driven DNA kind of built into the larger organization. How much of data-driven VC investing are you able to practice in your early stage investing? Is that possible?
I think it's a challenge, to be honest with you, because you just don't have enough proof points out there. I think what you can do is generate signals out in the market as to what type of demand exists for what type of products. That's actually a key tenet of sort of our customer-driven model. But I think it's very, very challenging, particularly on the enterprise side where we focus, to be able to look at data and say, yes, that one's going to win. I think as you get to later stages, that becomes something that is more feasible. But I think you can be rigorous around and analytical around the work that you do at an early stage, but I'm not sure that the data-driven strategy is quite there yet. However, I do think there's a really attractive opportunity to utilize data in early stage venture capital. And why am I kind of talking out of both sides of my mouth? I think there are a lot of underutilized data assets that are out there that can help, in particular, portfolio companies once you've invested in them. Like if you take our portfolio, for example, we have 30 companies, a majority of whom are at a similar stage, selling to a similar customer base, dealing with similar challenges. There's a lot of collective knowledge to be taken advantage of, understanding of sales cycles, the right people to meet at the right places. From that perspective, I do think that there's a critical role that data can play in helping a lot of early stage companies succeed. I'm just probably more skeptical of its ability to then drive investment decisions.
Right. Speaking of sales, right? And I know that you've built your team with that mindset, right? That
Yes.
how can we offer more than money to founders, right? Let's talk about that for a little bit.
Yeah.
I remember when I was in a role like that, I would have VCs, pitching to me on behalf of the founders, right? Because I worked for a large enterprise. And, at some point it's like, okay, shouldn't the founder be the one giving me that sales pitch? Why are you doing it?
Yeah.
Do you find yourself doing that sales job for a founder, for a portfolio company? And is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Does it happen often?
It does. For us, though, we very, very much tried to avoid the notion of going to a prospective customer and saying, here's my toolbox of portfolio companies, which tool would you like to select? We don't think that's really useful to anyone involved in that discussion. But what we do believe is valuable is being engaged in the ecosystem, understanding what priorities are. And so rather than having to call up a prospective customer and say, hey, I've got these 5 companies, which one do you want to meet? We can say, hey, we spoke 2 months ago and you recognized or you identified this as a potential pain point. We know of a few companies out there. They could be our portfolio company, they could not. Would you like to meet any of them? Because we think they could address the thing that you were talking about a few months ago. We try to make that a natural part of the conversation. As it relates to our broader business, business development support and getting people in the right doors at the right places is one part of it, and I think that's useful. But for a lot of early stage companies, that in of itself isn't going to be a determinant of success. I think what we found is it's one thing to get in the door, but then you have to know how to position your product appropriately and really articulate a value proposition to the right person. And so we've brought in a member of our team to focus specifically on that. Once you then get in the door, that's great. But if you're not ready to actually scale with that customer, as we like to say, you're not bank ready, that's another challenge. And so we've brought in someone within our organization to help support people on that. Our overall thought on the talent that we've hired and the way in which we support companies is, for most businesses we deal with, the most critical thing is getting those early customers and starting to scale with them. And so our efforts are tailored pretty exclusively toward that.
As you've gone from founding Point72 Ventures now, what, 7 years ago, right? Has it been? It's been a few years.
A little over 4 at this point. A little over 4 at this point.
4 years. So as you've gone from being a founding partner at the firm to now having a team with some good critical mass and some fantastic talent, how have you seen that process? I mean, has that changed what you do personally at the firm a lot?
Yes.
Do you lean more on others? Are you still, I mean, just give me a sense of 4 years ago versus today.
Yeah.
Daily life.
Look, we've always thought of our business as an operating business focused on supporting early stage founders. And so with that sort of startup mindset, we've kind of followed a fairly typical startup evolution. When it started, it was Pete, myself, one of our other founding team members in a room, and we were doing basically everything from diligence to portfolio support, building CRMs, you name it. I think what we've learned over time is we've identified the biggest gaps in our skill set as it relates to being able to impact founders. And so every time we've identified a gap, we've said, let's bring in someone who's much better at that one thing than we are, and then let them do that thing. And so if I use a representative example of Adam Carson, who former head of digital strategy and partnerships at Chase, he knows more about the digital part of banking than any of us. And more importantly, he knows how startups can deal with an organization of that size, how they can position their product, how they can get through a sales process. When we were first going, I would provide input on that, but having not lived directly through it, we ultimately decided, why don't we bring in someone who we can let do the thing that they do best with all of our portfolio companies. So that's something that, as we've identified gaps, we've sort of whittled away the number of day-to-day requirements that we have. And I think, honestly, that's been to the benefit of our portfolio companies.
Yeah. No, thanks for that. And I feel like, I feel like this is the kind of stuff that doesn't get talked about, much, right? Because, when founders look at you as an investor, as a VC, right, it's almost like the VC is on a pedestal and you have to pitch and they are the judge and then they kind of give a decision, yay, nay. But I think the reality is a bit more nuanced than that. And I think the approach that you are taking, calling yourselves as operating partners in the business, I think that's a very high touch approach to investing, which in my mind is a big differentiator here. Let me ask you just one last question here, Tripp, and then I want to talk about what we are trying to do in these special times. Any advice, anything that you would like to share with people who will listen to this, are listening to this, especially in the early stage founder community, and especially in these very difficult, strange, different times that we live in? Is there any advice, thoughts that you would like to share?
Yeah, it's a great question. The thing I've been thinking about quite a bit lately is we don't know what's going to happen in the near term here. And I think we just have to all get comfortable with the fact that we're not going to know anything over the next several months. And so our advice to founders and my advice to founders out there is just know that that's the case. But for the types of businesses that we invest in, as tragic as this pandemic has been and is, I think it's an accelerant for the financial services industry. It's sort of a gradually then suddenly moment. I think coming out of this, people are going to realize that a lot of the status quo is no longer acceptable, whether it's how you serve your customers or how you operate your business. And I think generally that's going to move the financial services industry forward as it relates to technology. And for founders out there, particularly those who are focused on the enterprise fintech side of things, I think it's going to be a great opportunity for them. And so the advice I give is stay calm for now. I think there's some compelling light at the end of the tunnel.
I can almost see that poster, right? What is that? Keep calm.
Yeah,
and
right, exactly. Exactly.
Keep calm and stay innovative, right? So Tripp, thank you so much. I want to end with just a quick pitch for what we are doing in this COVID pandemic days. And I really appreciate all your thoughts. I really appreciate you taking the time on the weekend. Thank you for answering the questions without any prep. We were able to have a great conversation, and I really appreciate all of that, Tripp. So Tripp Shriner, everybody from Point72 Ventures, thank you. I want to end with just a quick pitch for what we are doing in the COVID-19 scenario here. We have set up a COVID-19 fund in partnership with Meshad, which is a 501c3 organization here in the US, to be able to make contributions to solo volunteers and small organizations who are spending time, resources, and their energy on the ground to help people who are affected by COVID-19. The page to visit is gomedici.com/donate, and you can learn about the fund on that page, and you can make a donation, and you can actually make a difference. No contribution is too small, and we are hoping that we are able to help the many folks around the world, especially in the markets where we play and the communities that are affected, by sharing some of the luxuries that we have here in the ecosystem that we live in, and sharing a little bit of that with people who don't even have hope. So please visit the page, gomedici.com/donate. And once again, thank you everyone, and thank you, Tripp. This is Medici Inner Circle Live Weekend Wisdom, focused on VCs and what we can learn from them. Thank you.